It is not Lia Thomas's fault for competing in women's swimming. Lia Thomas followed the rules set by the NCAA.
There is an argument which is being made that with a trans female being part of the sport, there is a certain disadvantage being created for the rest, which again, like, is not completely untrue. But within the legal boundaries, everything seems to become an issue when the other person starts winning, right? So, are we just being salty about the fact?
The Women's World Cup also recently concluded. Congratulations to Australia. That's 12 ICC trophies out of 19 now. Where do you see women's sport going now?
That's the point. Like, the conversation around women's sport is just it's women's sport. Like, no, it's sport. You are, if you are playing a World Cup, it has to be, you have to mention it's a World Cup event. It's not a women's World Cup event.
I think the WNBA has also been a great push in that sense. I know it's the WNBA, but it's created its own identity and it's created its own market.
Which is why the UFC never falls short. A title fight is a title fight irrespective of who's fighting. If Valentina's fighting, she's fighting at best second last in that PPV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all new episode of All About Sports, the podcast, a sports podcast weekly for the fans, by the fans. Joining me today is Aniket,
Hi guys.
and I'm your second host for today, Mazhar. And just before we deep dive into this week's episode, just a quick reminder of what we covered last week. So last week it was just Rishabh, and Rishabh just went into this frenzy of discussing the IPL and made his predictions. Frankly, I generally disagree with Krishnan's predictions, and more often than not, he's wrong. So I wouldn't necessarily bet on any of his predictions, but I did agree with his top four. So do check out that episode. Fun fact: he didn't pick his Chennai Super Kings in it. For all those who have tuned into our previous episodes. Now, this week we'll be moving away from cricket. We'll be discussing sport in general and more so regarding women's sport. And the reason for that is given the recent controversy around transgenders in sport, especially Lia Thomas, the transgender swimmer. For those who don't know, Lia Thomas was basically William Thomas before, swam in the NCAA as a man, and then decided to take part in women's swimming. And now let's be very clear, it is not Lia Thomas's fault for competing in women's swimming. Lia Thomas followed the rules set by the NCAA around the time period for which Lia Thomas has to stay out of competition, which was originally 36 months but was brought down to 18 months, which meant that Lia Thomas could take part in the NCAA championships, ended up winning the 200 and 500 yard freestyles, and also did extremely well in 1650, which obviously raised eyebrows given that Leah Thomas won by more than a second in the 500 yard freestyle, has beaten Olympic medalists as well in the women's criteria. So that's been the major talking point and issue that people have had with Leah Thomas and in general with transgenders being a part of female sport. So just around that, we're going to be discussing how has women's sport been impacted and not necessarily just to do with transgenders, just in general, where has it come, how far it's come. Also recently, let's not forget, we had discussed this in a few in a I think a couple of episodes back where we discussed how the US women's soccer team ended up suing the US Soccer Federation for gender discrimination in terms of pay. Equal pay still does not exist. However, they've won that case and they were awarded a sum of what, $24 million, if I'm not wrong. So there's been this challenge in terms of women's sport over the years, and it continues to be a challenge, and that's what we'll be covering today. Gui, I'm going to come to you immediately. Firstly, your thoughts on Leah Thomas being allowed to participate And just then, where do you see women's sport going from here, given the transgenders being allowed to take part in several other sports and tournaments?
So I think, to reiterate what you said, there was no rule breaking here. That's the first thing everyone should note before they form an opinion, before they start reading anything about this, is that it was all done within the boundaries set by the NCAA, which is the competition which we're speaking of over here, right? Coming to what I feel about it is, there are a few different takes, right, to this. Like, one is the uh, basic dignity take. Like, why would you bring this up in a conversation if it is legal to take part? You don't need to mention it right now. We are basically salty about the fact that someone else is winning. That's one take. The other one is, an argument which could be made is that there are certain genetic buildups which you cannot, uh, I mean, which you're not accounting for when you're looking at this, right? Like, I mean, have you seen the wingspan of a basketball player? Like, you have to be, basically, there are certain genetic gifts which are associated with the sport, right? And then there are certain genetic gifts which are associated with gender also, like, where, I mean, just naturally the wingspan of 6 foot tall male would be slightly different as opposed to a female who's 6 feet tall. This could be differences in, like, waist weight, shape, form. There are a lot of things which would help your athletic performance, which are, I mean, again, super technical stuff, which is not very easy to break down. But yes, it could lead to advantages or disadvantages in your athletic performance. So there is an argument which is being made that, with a trans female being part of the sport, there is a certain disadvantage being created for the rest, which again, like, is not completely untrue. It's not completely untrue, but again, within the legal boundaries. So are we just being salty about the fact? Again, something which is very interesting, which was mentioned by you only, is that everything seems to become an issue when the other person starts winning, right? Like, only time you complain about this is when they're winning. If an individual isn't winning, you're not complaining about whether they are tall, short. Forget. I mean, you're not. It's not even a consider. It's not a conversation as long as you're not in the winners bracket, right? If Lia Thomas was losing every race, would you care? The answer is probably not. Like, okay, at that point it becomes a conversation about, okay, wow, this is inclusivity, yay, all the good stuff. But again, issues arise only when there is this
Exactly.
apparently skewed result, right? Again, I say apparently skewed because all within the legal norms of the competition. So, two very different ways to look at it. I don't really know how to break it down, but
So the one sound argument that I heard was around how it's around the testosterone, right? Like, so obviously a man typically will have more testosterone than a woman. And what happens, and the thing is, when you grow up, pre-puberty is fine. Like, there can be equal competition between boy and a girl, but it's when puberty hits is when you suddenly start to see that massive difference because of estrogen and testosterone obviously taking their own paths. Now, the argument I got on that was, in a case of a transgender like Leah Thomas, I hate to bring up Leah Thomas as a case because I don't think that's the best case. We've seen failures in terms of transgenders as well in sport. Of course, Leah Thomas deserves a lot of credit, is a talented swimmer, no doubt. But you're talking about someone who was ranked 540, 54th or something like that, to becoming the leading swimmer in a different, when the moment the person changes gender and participates, it makes you really think about like how much of a role testosterone plays. Because at the end of the day, testosterone is a banned substance, right? Like you can't inject yourself with extra testosterone. This becomes more like a natural performance enhancing drug, because obviously Leah has naturally has more testosterone. No matter what reductions you do, the training is different, puberty hit differently, growth hormones are different, everything is just so different. So from a science standpoint, it made it like a questionable case for whether transgender should be allowed, trans female athletes should be allowed to take part against females. Again, Gui, it's never a case where it's questioned when a female person changes to a male, because again they won't be winning in most cases. And World Rugby has banned transgenders from participation, claiming safety reasons. So basically, what so they were saying that like trans females, sorry, females who want to be trans males cannot take part because of safety reasons, and it doesn't work the other way also because of safety reasons. So they've made those claims and they excluded it. So each sport and each body and organization has their own takes on this. So I think that's something that, and I like what one of my professors at university said. He said, no one wins in this case. It's just such a murky scenario to be in.
Yeah.
And I must say, I agree with him. It is a lose lose. Like, no one's going to be happy. I definitely understand that transgenders have a right to participate in professional sport. It's just that how can they be included where it's equal footing, and all of that comes into question. They are planning, and I heard an interesting recommendation. I want your thoughts on this before we then delve into the other aspects of women's sport. Was have a general or open criteria, and then you have a female criteria. Now, the red flag that I raised in this point was, the thing is, trans females want to be associated as females and they want to participate as women. So, making this demarcation again takes away from their beliefs or rights. I've heard another flip side of an opinion, which I can't share on an open forum, but I'll definitely bring up. Whoever wants and whoever's listening, you want to have this discussion, feel free to reach out to us, DM us on Instagram, any of us, and we can discuss that. But Gui, what do you think about this suggestion?
Again, doesn't work, right? Like the uh, you're just basically saying that okay, you convert you con you're just fundamentally opposing what is a very big life change which someone has opted for, right? You're just saying that okay, this does, we can't make this work in sports, is what you're saying. When the moment you do an open category versus, I mean, what the suggestion was, the point is, you already said it. I think I've said it in a line and don't think that it needs more elaboration. The fact that you are just fundamentally opposing the entire idea. You're saying like no, this entire thing which you've done for your whole life, all right, where you would put down like this works for every aspect except for sports, is what I say. Which is which I don't really see is like a solid way to justify the whole thing.
Yeah, also I think the at this point the transgenders who are professionals or elite athletes are so low. Like the
Yeah.
percentage is so low. So I think, I mean, it seems like a drastic step to take to just, you know, lead to exclusion, and to take just Lia Thomas as an example and then ban all athletes. I don't know. It's just, for me right now, I just think there's not enough of evidence or enough of participation from the transgender community in general for us to make such take such drastic measures and make such decisions at this point. Anyway, let's get into women's sport, the classical women's sport now. I mentioned the US women's team, all of that. We've already discussed equal pay and gender disparity and how that exists, the entire masculine culture that exists in sport, so on and so forth. Kui, where do you see women's sport going now? We saw the incredible attendance for Barcelona, 91,000 was it, in terms of attendance, the highest ever recorded in a match when it was Barcelona versus Real Madrid women's. Do you see this just being one-offs? The Women's World Cup also recently concluded. Before you get into it, Gui, congratulations to Australia. That's 12 ICC trophies out of 19 now, 7 ODI World Cup wins. Unbelievable. Unbeaten in the tournament. Ellie, Elisa Healy, 170, if I'm not wrong. Gui, your thoughts on that? And then obviously just take over and discuss where do you
So
think women's sport is going.
I mean that Australian women's cricket team just is on a different level, right? And they have been for very long. So many congratulations to them. Coming to to your broader question, like things like the 91,000 attendance, spectacular. Like, but again, does the North London Derby get that attendance? Will the Manchester Derby get that attendance? The answer is no, right? There's also a promotion thing. Like, I follow a lot of. I mean, I am part of subset of Twitter followers which follow women's football, right? So the one of the debates was just that the fact that clubs in England don't push as hard. All right, there isn't enough promotion. Like what is it? UEFA Women's Champions League quarterfinals were taking place, right? The second leg was in the previous week, and just didn't seem to get that much of a push from the respective clubs that the women's team is playing a Champions League quarter final. Like, I mean, the men's team were to play a Champions League quarter final, it's berserk, right? The entire week is just that. There are 2-3 days of the social media handles promoting the event, and then 2 days after that you'll have bench cam and all access areas. You will have God knows what not, what the manager ate this morning, everything. You'll have all sorts of things where I mean, unnecessary information, but that's the point, right? That's how you build up, well, the following. That there are certain aspects around it which you need to hype up to ensure that people are glued on from basically Monday to Wednesday or Thursday, whenever your games are. So I don't want to say one-offs, because there is like a very good identified contingent for a lot of these sites, a dedicated fan following, which travels, which goes to games, vocal online, as as vehement in losses as they are when the men's team loses. But then again, we are in an era where we need to push this in the same manner as we push our male athletes events, right? Which is where the UFC never falls short. Like, a title fight is a title fight irrespective of who's fighting, right? They've never differentiated saying that this is like the women's bracket, men's bracket, nothing like that. If Valentina's fighting, she's fighting at best second last in that PPV. She is not fighting in the beginning of that PPV event, because it's a title fight. We're selling it as a title fight. There are two title fights. If trust me, if they're I mean, nothing short of second last, right? She or even Amanda Nunes, they're not fighting any, like, it can't even be the third last fight. It's second last or last, which is because I've never heard that there's no undercurrent in that conversation, right? That this is a women's title fight. It's a title fight, which is what you would want, like, which is where you need to push all your conversations in sports, right? Again, Arsenal women are playing Tottenham women, which is fine, all right, because here you have a men's team also, but you don't need to again and again emphasize that, well, women's team versus women's team. Okay, so you have to write it because you have to write it. But then again, like some of these matches are, they are intentionally pushing these matches in the main stadiums, like a few matches at the Emirates, a few matches at Old Trafford, a few matches at the Etihad, which is a great thing. But this has to get more and more consistent, provided it actually works, right? Again, Shubham's not on the podcast, so I'll say it. Like they have to draw in enough eyes for it to happen at these stadiums. Similar conversation around cricket also. As loved cricket is in India, I don't think like the IPL will get more attention, which should not be the case considering it's a World Cup. Like again, even in the previous World Cup, I don't think people started watching until we were in the semis, which then is which I believe is a marketing push, right? You need to convince people like, this is important, you have to watch this. This is like the pinnacle of women's cricket, and it's bigger than the IPL if you ask me, and it should be, like, importance wise it is bigger than the IPL for sure. Okay, it doesn't might not bring enough money in, but that's the point. Like the conversation around women's sport is this, it's women's sport. Like, no, it's sport. It's, you are, if you are playing a World Cup, it has to be, you have to mention it's a World Cup event, it's not a women's World Cup event. So again, like, everyone needs to take notes from the UFC with regards to this.
I agree, Gui. I think you hit the nail on the head with the entire explanation. Think sport in general has, like I said, this masculine culture associated with it. And till that mindset doesn't change, it's going to take time for things to change. The UFC is a great example. That's so true. The best fighters get the PPVs, the best fighters get the headlines. Doesn't matter. So if it's Valentina versus, let's say, some guy who's ranked fourth or fifth in the men's draw, Valentina is going to be the headliner. And I think it's not just UFC. I think in general, combat sports, not actually, yeah, boxing doesn't get that. So it's crazy how the UFC gets so much wrong, but they get one these few things absolutely spot on. I think the WNBA has also been a great push in that sense, because I know it's the WNBA, women's NBA, but it's created its own identity and it's created its own market in a lot of ways. And credit to the NBA Players Association,
Yeah.
obviously the late Kobe Bryant as well, in being advocates for women's sport and saying that, listen, it's not acceptable to just watch male sport. And what made a difference was them going and attending every single game that was there and then talking about it, sharing it on social media. Sports Center's been pushing it. I think American sport in general has now slowly started doing that. Even the US women's winning that case was somewhat of a step. Yes, equal pay hasn't come yet, should be there given how strong the US are in soccer. But I don't know. I think culture still needs to change, and till culture doesn't change, I think we are far ways from it. Just final thoughts, Gui. In terms of women's sport, like you mentioned the World Cup, right? Do you think if they just did away with the name of women's attached to it, do you think that mentally and subconsciously that would make a difference in terms of viewership for the generation Z that is coming up, because they are so woke and so well aware of everything? Do you think that that'll probably make a difference? Because there's less inclination towards watching sport in general. Now people watch sport as entertainment rather than like this irrational way of watching it, like we have grown up watching sport, in terms of loyalties and in terms of understanding how, like now there are people who support Barca and Madrid. That just, that sounds absurd, but it's because they like the way both teams may play, for example. So where do you think women's sport will, do you think that this change in terms of the tonalities and the terming will make that difference and see women's sport really rising up.
Definitely, like it's one of the things which should happen, because it's something which, okay, for it to naturally happen, someone is to, you need to forcefully remove, it's basically when you have to unlearn wrong things, it's that, right? So you have to forcefully unlearn something. So, which is, I mean, before someone naturally adopts it, you need to forcefully unwind all the impact of all the incorrect behavior, right? Again, incorrect behavior is taking it too far, but like the incorrect, you got my point. uh,
Equality is important, basically.
the tonality is very important, like the way of which, why do some statements hurt more than the others? Because someone said it in a mean way, right? That's, I mean, so the moment you intentionally are adding or rather removing a certain tag, you could be adding importance to it, or you could be taking something away when you're adding a certain word to it. So tonality change is certainly required, and for it to come naturally, I think you need to first force it.
So thanks for that, Gui. Uh, Honestly, I think women's sport has a long way to go in general. I think we are seeing things change for sure. And it's also the responsibility of fans and society as a whole to push women's sport and create this awareness as to, firstly, this difference should have never existed. I think the Olympics is also doing a good job in terms of creating equal participation. We saw the mixed relays this time at the Olympics. We saw the highest female participation at the Olympics ever. I think it was what, 45% or 43%, something like that, of female participation at the Olympics, which is a significant step because you want women to be at the fore in the biggest event or sports event of them all, right? So I think the signs are there. It firstly should have never reached this point altogether. We should have never had all of these things. Twitter hate needs to also stop towards all these athletes, social media hatred, where they still pass these chauvinistic comments, which are just terrible and shocking to see. We're in 2022 and nothing seems to change from since when we were small as well. But thanks so much, Gui. Thanks for sharing all those insights, especially about football. We all know that you are a massive women's football follower and supporter, a massive advocate for it as well. So we've also done a few episodes on women's football. We've actually interviewed female player as well. So do check that out. We've interviewed India's women's rugby captain as well. So that's something that you can check out as well. We did all of that over both our seasons so far. And we'll be back with many more episodes, trying to get more women athletes and female participation onto our podcast as well. So stay tuned for all of that. Until then, we'll see you next week. Take care, stay safe, and see you soon. Bye bye.
If you like this episode, make sure to leave a like and share it with anyone else who might be interested. You can also subscribe on any social media platform that you prefer, and all our links are in the bio. We also have a website with all our episodes as well as blogs and a whole lot of other sports content, so make sure to check that out as well.